Hey everyone, it's Arshawn. Welcome to another edition of the Journey to CEO show. We're going to be talking about family succession planning here, family businesses. How do we move on to the next generation? How do we make sure that our businesses transition well? It's an interesting area, and it's an area fraught with complexities. So we have a practicing attorney joining us. Marcy is going to be here with us. She's going to tell us a little bit about her practice, and then we're going to jump into really what we see with these family businesses and getting these transitions moved over correctly, and kind of some of the issues and how it can impact in our theme of the show, of course, is the journey from being an entrepreneur to being a CEO. So we want to talk about how that succession planning can factor into your planning. So Marcy, I'm going to give you a second to kind of introduce yourself, maybe tell people a little bit about your practice and what you're doing, and then we'll have some questions for you about what you've seen with kind of people on this journey.
Thanks, Shawn. I'm glad to be participating today. My firm, Smorey Giger Law, works exclusively with small businesses and all of their general business legal needs, everything from getting the business started all the way through to what we're talking about today, and that is exiting the business, sometimes planned, sometimes unplanned, but an opportunity to get in front of that is ideal, and it's a recommendation I make to my clients as they delve through all of the commercial things they do in their everyday world.
Yeah, perfect. And I'm going to pop you up on the screen because I think you and I talk a lot about how do you, build this plan for your future. And I think it's important you think about who runs the business after you run the business.
Well, it's very important. And one of the things we also talk about is ego, in that, you are starting the business, it's your baby, you have designed it. And as it grows, it takes on more of a life of its own, and you are not as personally involved. Hopefully you've got systems in place, but one of the things that becomes important is to think about in a planned way, which is why we thought Marcy was so good for this show. It's necessary to think about what is the next step for this business. You've built a business. It should have value. It has worth. And so as you are leaving the stage as it is, and someone is coming in your place, you're either selling the business or you are planning for next generation of your family. So it takes some real thoughtfulness to plan well so that you're taken care of as well as your family, and the business is able to thrive in the long run.
Yeah, Marcy, we'd love to hear kind of what you do with your clients and what's the process when somebody comes in and starts thinking about these types of issues. What do you lead them through, and what are some of the options that people can do to plan for the future?
Well, there's a tremendous amount of discretion in exit planning. It's often a reflection of the personality of the owners. It has a lot to do with the industry in which the business operates. But ultimately, I recommend a fully integrated approach, looking at all the things that are important, which would include business valuation. It would include their expectations for who the successors are, perhaps even pre-negotiating some buy-sell agreements or arrangements with fellow shareholders, or the expectation that family members would be the new owners of the business. You can plan for some of that in advance. But I would also look at this as a full lifetime exit strategy, because it's reflective of those business owners and what they want for their family.
Yeah, and I think that's an important conversation to have. I think one thing I've found is it used to be years ago that everybody said, hey, I'll just leave this business to my children and they'll love it. And now more and more the children are saying, you know what, I don't want to do what you did. I want to go a different direction, right? Plus, with people being healthier longer, it adds some complexity to the planning, right, Marcy?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so you really got to have that conversation and build it. And I talk about that journey to CEO. So I think a lot of this really depends on your style too, as a leader, right? Do you want to lead family members? Do you want to bring in outside people? How do you really envision your company growing?
I think that's true. I think that there's a lot of analysis based on the individuals, but I would even take it one step further, Shawn. There's also kind of the foundation of the business structure, which is really important. If you think about continuity, as a legal concept, continuity of existence. You have lots of family businesses that are simple, and it might even be housed in a sole proprietorship in which there's one family member that owns the business. And sole proprietorships don't extend beyond the natural life of the owner. So there's a different way to handle kind of the continuity of a business structured as a sole proprietorship as compared to perhaps a partnership. Or there's a very common business form of a limited liability company, and it could be single member owned, or there could be multiple owners. And every state's law is a little bit different on how, if the member exits, how the other members have rights and what you would need to do to succeed them. And then, of course, you also have the corporation example. There is big public companies, which isn't our audience today, but those family-held, closely held companies do operate as corporations. And there's ongoing opportunities to handle that relative to what the statute provides for shareholder succession.
Yeah, and I think you raise an interesting point. It's something Ann and I talk about in our Journey to CEO work, which is who runs this business, right? And I think an important concept, maybe you can expand on this a little bit, is the ownership and the profits and how those flow doesn't necessarily match how the business is controlled, right? And you can separate those two, and sometimes that's very beneficial for a business. So you want to expand on that a little bit about how that works from the legal side?
So ownership is often reflected as interest in profits. And interest in profits may not necessarily correlate to authority or control over operations. So depending on the legal entity type, which I mentioned a few minutes ago, together with whatever kind of governing documents there might be, perhaps bylaws in a corporation or operating agreement for an LLC, or even some type of partnership agreement, those documents are binding contractually, and they provide for the rights and responsibilities of all the parties involved. So you look there for kind of that custom treatment, but if those things are vague or absent, or perhaps there's a dispute, you go back to the underlying state law, and there's a lot of defaults there that talk about how control and liability are linked, but not necessarily a direct correlation to ownership. So you have a lot of ability to customize these things.
Yeah, and that makes sense in a lot of cases, right? So, Ann, I mean, when we're kind of talking to people about their journey to CEO and their personality style, different stages call for different sizes of teams and different involvement, right? So,
and there's also so many. I look at there's so many emotions that flow into this that are a part of the decision making, and I'd be interested, Marcy, to see if you've had a situation where the initial parents of the organization decided that they want to provide for their family members, for their kids. Their kids are not necessarily attuned to the leadership end of things, so they actually would hire someone in as the next president. Have you had a situation where it's like, okay, we know our kids are not capable, but we want them working there, but
This happens more often than not. There's frequently scenarios in which the children of the second generation are employed in the business, have had different roles along the way, but perhaps are not really positioned either by personality type or interest to actually become the new leadership of that organization. And there's another opportunity to make this fit that family and that enterprise, in which you can bring in an outsider to kind of serve that CEO role and anticipate that there's a future point in which that second generation is going to take the lead. Or you may find additional alternatives that, recognizing perhaps that family isn't going to be a family held business eternally, and look at ways to exit that might include, a stock redemption and allow a third party to even come in, any different tools to get the value out of the business, if in fact that's the outcome that the second generation is looking for.
Yeah,
I think that's really important to consider that, and we talk also about starting at the end. what is it your end? Where do you want to end? And then
Yep.
you work your way backwards. So it's reverse engineering. But in that way, you know, and we say this, it's not in our book, Journey to CEO. We're not as concerned about the paycheck coming week by week, but what are you building as far as value so that when you go to sell, there is value. You talked and you said one of the first things is valuation. And in our book, we talk about, maybe it's not quite as valuable as you thought it was. And then if you know that going in, then you can build for that before and work. Also, when do you know, I'm saying that you should be starting almost as you start that business, you should know how you want to exit, you know, and that's important. But, you know, at least I say, if you were selling the business, whatever, give your lawyer and give your accountant and banker 3 full years to work with you so that you have the financials in place as well. So, you know, and it could be that you decide you want you choose that you're going to be an absentee owner and that you'll keep the ownership, but that, you know, you're going to allow other people to run it. And we see that, I think, you'd see that, Marcy, with franchises. I don't know if you work much with the franchise world, but I see that more.
I see it on occasion, but most of my clients are sort of in a family business or homegrown model, or buying into a business to be independent. Few franchises I get involved with, but in the interest of valuation, once again, there's a tremendous opportunity here for the business to have some unique existence in that perhaps they're looking to do an appraisal of the business by a third party, and those are frequently industry specific, or maybe they're working off some sort of valuation formula where there's multiples on earnings. But it's all going to reflect back, as you mentioned, Anne, sort of on the value that they've built over time. And to the extent that you really can look at the you know, end of that long road and that destination and steer accordingly. So steer accordingly for the actual successors as individuals, the actual valuation, and the mechanism by which you want to exit. They all sort of work in harmony together towards that one goal.
Yeah, and I think a big thing here that maybe a lot of people are thinking about, but becomes very apparent when you go to sell your business or transition it, is kind of this independence, right? You know, we talked a little bit about building the management separate from the ownership. Right. And when you have a financial buyer show up, one of the first things they're asking about is, can this business run without you? And those type of policies, procedures, internal governance, management structure, not only helps you with valuation, but it's going to help you with the succession planning.
Yeah, we call that turnkey. We like it as turnkey as possible.
Exactly.
And I would agree with that. And I think it's, once again, reflective of the ownership. If you truly have a small family business and the owner operators are very, very integrated, you get further and further away from that ability to distinguish individual from business. But if you're planning for that long road and you have an expectation that you're going to be able to have that business operate independently and have value outside of that owner, then you absolutely have to build in those management tools that you mentioned. It's critical.
Yeah, I want to talk about one of the tricky situations that comes up in a family business, and probably some of our viewers may have this type of issue. Is, you know, what do you do when you have a couple of kids maybe, and one or two of them you want in the business, running the business, and two of them want to do something else, but they don't want to give up that value of the business? How do you balance that when you reach those kind of situations?
I've had a couple of scenarios like that recently. In fact, I've had operations where, just based on law, some of the family members can be owners. It's typically license related, and some of the family members cannot be owners. So you have that senior generation that's looking to treat their children equally, but they technically are prohibited because some of those children can be owners of the business in the future and some can't simply by permits and licensing. So they looked for other resources. And this is where that full integrated approach really makes a lot of sense, because if you're trying to find the whole lifestyle exit, that's when you look and the business is only one asset of the family. There may be other assets that they would consider in this attempt for equal treatment of the entire estate over the entire family.
Yeah, and I think that brings in kind of the whole picture, right? So it's not just the business, and that's one of the things we talk about in the book Journey to CEO is like you need to balance your life and your business because the two should interplay with each other. So, Marcy, so I think a lot of it is about your personality, your styles, and of course your wish for the future generations. I've had clients where, you may have one child just doesn't have an interest in the business, or, maybe one child has a disability and they may not just be destined to run the business. I've had the situation where I've had brothers, and, the ones essentially, parents are saying, hey, you're going to have to run the business and look over your brother when we're no longer here. Mm. And so that just changes a completely different planning scenario. Those are at least friendly. Have you had a situation where you've had to, where perhaps, one child's picked and the other child's disappointed by the decision?
I have had a situation, not specifically designed like that example, but one where one of the siblings has a much stronger, more pronounced personality than another. Mm-hmm. To the extent that, one of the siblings feels like they have no real power or control, even though they may have a nearly equal ownership. And there are some legal mechanisms that you can put in place to try and ease that relationship, to sort of keep the siblings operating kind of on a level playing field, and prevent one sibling from forcing out another or giving an unfair treatment. You can put some contractual obligations in place in an attempt, perhaps maybe it's just a deterrent, or an attempt to try and, avoid problems down the road when it's not written out, right? So all of those protocols, and the more that you can put the expectations in front of everybody, the more likely you'll have success with them.
Yeah, and I think that's something that kind of has been hitting a theme all day here throughout this entire session, right? Is the more you write down, document, and structure before you have problems, the better off you're going to be.
Absolutely, positively, yes.
While you're still friends, if you're partners, make those documents while you still are friends. And how often, Marcy, do you recommend revisiting some of those documents? Because I know that when you start an LLC or you start a small business, you're going to put those documents in place, operating agreements, buy-sell agreements. But how often should we be advising our clients to revisit them?
I would absolutely recommend a revisiting after any significant change, whether it's a significant change in the life of the individual, such as marriage, divorce, children, or a significant change in the business in which they've added on a big product line, they've expanded, they bought an additional brick-and-mortar location. Any of those big impactful changes would require you to kind of go back and look at the operating documents, the governing documents, to make sure they still fit. And even if there's a passage of time when all is sort of going as normal, I still recommend a pretty frequent revisit, because your view may change, or the economic world around you, or in this case, you could have something out of left field impacting the economy. And the more closely in touch you are with having those documents line up with your current state, the more likely they'll play out the way you want them to.
Yeah, I think that's good. And I think, one thing that's kind of been highlighted by this, Marcy, is kind of the being in this current environment. So much value is placed on that leadership and, whoever's running the business. And of course, now we're talking about having new generations come in there. And those styles and those aptitudes are going to change over time, right? At some point, children are going to be more interested in running the operations, or you may have other leaders developing in your business. So you're going to have to go back and change your management structure and your power and authority within the documents to recognize that you just have this change in your business and a change in the way people are growing as leaders.
I would agree. And that frequent revisiting based on how things transition over time is going to encourage that opportunity to customize it to the current state. Absolutely.
Yeah, and you want to talk about just having these kind of tough discussions, within a business. 'Cause I know you've had some of this type of stuff where you work with your clients.
Yeah, I mean, their idea of what reality is and what reality is can be very different, and so it becomes important that, again, based on documents, the more you can have written down, the more you can reference. Also, if you want to say, hey, look, you thought your business was worth $1.5 million, and we're showing that it's not. I think that as long as you can be objective and show how you can fix things or how you can solve their issues to get them, whoever the client is, they have different end game expectations, how you can get them to the end game. And it may mean a pivot, and that's one of the things I think, Shawn, we're seeing with our journey with our clients, that what they thought they had, especially after COVID, may not be the same. So they're going to have to pivot. They may need a totally different business model. So that's one of the ways in which, we just encourage people to make certain that you are staying in contact with your financial advisor, your bankers, your lawyer, all of those people. That's your advisory group. And so, it's not just calling in Marcy at the end of the day and saying, okay, well, I'm ready to sell now. You should have an ongoing working relationship and make sure that, that she knows what your long-term expectations are, and that, then you can say, hey, I'm 5 years out from retirement or what have you. And I think that the other thing about some of these difficult conversations, working with someone like a Marcy or your financial planner, and I know we're having one in the future on this show, they know other people that can come in and help. And I think that that's one of the things that I like to do with clients is, if we're having a difficult conversation, who else can I bring in? Who do I know who can assist them and maybe get some strategic partnerships going along, or, sell off one thing of the business, get something else that you're bringing in there. It's always under construction. And so that's one of the things that becomes very important in our journey to CEO is you're really not dead and buried until you're not done until you're dead and buried, really. That's the way to put it, and hopefully, we keep telling, and you write about this, Shawn, that you as the owner, entrepreneur, and there's a difference between we say this, an entrepreneur and a CEO, you have to be able to separate yourself from the business. And I think that that's one way that you two, who are both lawyers, you know how to position that. You know how to do that. I build systems and help them with the things that you put in place. But the systems for everything are important. And if you have systems, then it becomes more turnkey and you can separate yourself out. So your ego doesn't have to be crushed if you're finding you're not quite as valuable as you thought you were.
Yeah, and I think, Marcy, this kind of prompts, one of the hardest conversations I think with a lot of business owners is, having these tough conversations, particularly with partnerships. Who gets the authority? Who gets the upside with the family? Who gets the decision making? As Ian points out, kind of who's running the business and can the business run without you? Because I think there's an inherent conflict, right? Because the owner wants to be in control. They want to own everything. But if they really want a truly valuable business, they've got to kind of take that step back and let the business exist without them being there every second of every day.
Yeah, I would agree completely. Go ahead, Ann.
No, I was just thinking that it's not necessarily the second generation that provides the most conflict. It often is the third generation that I've seen in business.
There are statistics out there saying that many family businesses die during the third generation.
Oh my gosh! And
much higher failure rate.
You're talking about adding value. If I have a business and I have two sons, and I know one would be really good, but it's the other one who wouldn't be as good, that wants to run it, And then you're sitting there saying, okay, the value's just going to go down the toilet because this guy's not going to know what he's doing. And sometimes I think that's a harder decision too, and that's where you bring the lawyer in. That's where you have the lawyer do the negotiating.
We take care of making that transition from what the owner doesn't want to say onto the paper that everybody gets to sign. So I think your points are incredibly valid. And the only thing I'll add on to that is sort of echoing some of your principles. And that is the more the business itself, whatever it's engaged in those operations of whatever it sells, products or services, if it's really connected with that owner, then the more difficulty you'll have with those successors. Essentially, it may be the nature of the business. Some very successful businesses that have lots and lots of generations of family succession are like funeral homes. The nature of that business, it really works well with a model of ongoing family succession. But if there's a kind of a more new contemporary business that is related to someone's entrepreneurship for technology development, the successors may not be connected to that business the same way and would have a hard time being both the leader and possibly even being the owner if they don't have that connection with what the creativity of the origins were.
Yeah, and that's something we talk about in that journey to CEO is, what is your value added and focusing on that, right? And for some people, it's a creative element. Not impossible to replicate, but can be harder to replicate, right? And harder to just copy and paste out. But understanding that kind of reflects your ownership structure and also goes into that succession plan. Anne, I think you were going to say something.
One of the things that I find is, especially with the creativity, if you're the face of your business, then that becomes a very difficult thing for you to separate out and say, yes, I'm going to sell this because everybody knows the business based on you. And if you find that the creativity, you're the one who always comes up with the creative element and the creative answers, whether it's web design or you're doing advertising for radio or TV, you're coming up with the answers. That again becomes a difficult business to sell off to somebody else unless it's to a similar business, I would think. So you just have to watch to pull yourself back so that you're not the only one who is the face of the business.
Great long-term planning. Marcy, any thoughts on that?
I would think that you have a lot of this content in your program already, but that's where that really strong leadership steps in, right? They would recognize that the business would be different without them. They would recognize the holes in whatever the successor skills are, and they would identify that there is an expertise that needs to be added to complement the existing, successor plan so that it can be successful. So there's a lot that goes into that ultimate planning when you define that end road and you define the path between here and there. Filling in those gaps is going to be critical to success.
Yeah, I love it. Folks, we'd love to hear your comments. What are you doing for succession planning with your business? What challenges you face? And drop them here, of course, at the Journey to CEO YouTube channel. And of course, subscribe and ring the bell for notifications. And I think it's just good fundamentals we talked about here, Marcy, right? Is talk to your lawyer, get things structured, build a process, separate yourself from the business as you can, and then look to the future. And all of this is just having good discussions with your professional advisors and then documenting it.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. It's as long as you share openly and all of those financial advisors understand what you're trying to accomplish, that's what they're there for, to help you get there.
And I think, the other thing is too, of course, with someone like yourself, Marcy, and Anne and myself, we do this every day. We look at different businesses every day. So we can give options to our clients, right? We've looked at different situations. We've seen maybe not the exact situation, but we've seen similar situations. We could say, hey, you could try this, or you could try this. Which do you like? And those are good conversations to have, just to try on different options, try different ways you could do things.
And sometimes the clients really need that because they don't know where to go. Sometimes it's that first couple steps, and leading by example can make a really big difference.
And
I was going to say too, with the options, you're the one coming in that can see the blind spots. They're so busy often with their business and understanding how to run and work their business but there could be some blind spots out there that they don't see. And that's why an outside perspective becomes so important.
Yep, I think that's wonderful. Marcy, why don't you tell folks how they can find you and work with you? Because, I mean, I think you're just a wonderful wealth of knowledge for people.
Well, I appreciate that, Shawn, and I'm thrilled to be here today. Thank you for the opportunity. SmoreyGigerLaw.com is my website, and there is my email address, which is marcy@SmoreyGigerLaw.com. And I welcome the opportunity to work with small businesses. It is my expertise. Just to kind of nail that point home, I grew up small business. My parents were self-employed from the day I was born to the day they retired. I went out to big business, got some good experience in big law departments, and now my dream is coming full circle to take all those skills and experience in helping the small businesses, the family businesses that they don't have a law department down the hall, but they need that same resource. It's what I love to do every day.
Perfect. Folks, we're glad you're with us. Make sure you subscribe to Journey CEO YouTube channel. Marcy, thanks for being such a great guest. Ring the bell for notifications and let us know what you're seeing. Drop some comments. We'll look forward to talking with you. Thanks for joining us today, everybody.